All right, you saucy boys and spicy girls. This is my first real online lecture, so we'll just see how this goes. But I've made a slides presentation that we're going to go through as I get through this information, and then you guys are supposed to be watching this before you read the assigned scenes for today on Actively Learn. And this is just to give you guys a bit of a refresher and a bit of a review on the things that we read about 2 weeks ago, a little bit before that, and just the first little bit, first half, if you will, of Julius Caesar. And then you guys, after this, will be reading the rest of that first half today for your assignment. So let's go ahead and jump into this and do a quick little review on Julius Caesar, just to give you guys some background, and then we will go from there. So let me switch this over real quick to what I needed to do. There we go. All right, now here we are. Okay, so I'm up here in the corner as I should be. All is well. All right, so Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. We'll be using the same presentation for Act 3, Scene 3 through the end of the play to Act 5, Scene 5. So you guys will be reading 3-3 today, but before you do that, we're going to jump into this and just see where this goes. So just as a quick little refresher on things. So one of the biggest ideas in the entire play is Stoicism, and we talked a lot about this. We've looked at how some of the characters try to be Stoics when in reality, no one in this play is a real Stoic by any means. I mean, Portia's a good candidate, as you guys can remember her being Brutus's wife, but we'll get into that when we get to her big moment. But basically, Stoicism was a popular Roman belief that valued reason over emotion. And Shakespeare knew this, and he knew that all of the Roman senators, at least most of them, adhered and followed to this lifestyle. It wasn't proper for a man to show emotions in public. It wasn't proper for a man to, be very emotional or be angry or, deal with those kinds of things, because emotion was bad, and emotion kept you from actually thinking through things and actually thinking, oh, well, maybe I should do this instead of acting out of my own anger, or maybe I should figure out why I love this person rather than just falling head over heels for them. Maybe that would be a good idea for teenagers to follow. I don't know. You can do with that what you will. So basically, one of the best ways to look at Stoicism is just thinking about like how we can experience things in a way that make it better for us to actually live our lives out. So this also relates to Aristotle's whole view on catharsis, which we talked about when we were studying the Poetics and those couple of excerpts about tragedy and comedy and what catharsis was. So if you guys remember from that, or from that a while back, catharsis is that feeling where you get so wrapped up into a story that you feel like you're in it with the characters, but then finally when everything like reaches a resolution, then the emotions that were all stirred up in you can finally be released. So maybe if you enter into a play angry, like there's stuff going outside in the world that you're so mad, but then there's a character in the play who's also angry and they're the main character, and through their anger, they end up releasing that anger and then all comes to a happy end or some kind of fulfilling end, then your anger has been projected through the character and the character has dealt with the anger for you, and you have therefore experienced catharsis. It also works in the same way with, watching a sad movie. I think I use the example in class that sometimes you just need a good cry. And I have a list of films that will give you a good cry. When someone says they just need a good cry, what they're really saying is they just need a moment of catharsis to let go of all of their emotions. So that's kind of all this stuff plays together. But just for a little fun example, for those of you who are familiar with this, I think the best example of a Stoic that we have in modern day pop culture is, of course, the first officer of the Enterprise, Mr. Spock. And for those of you unfamiliar with Mr. Spock, Spock is a Vulcan, which is a member of a species of the planet Vulcan, who they do not live their lives according to any kind of emotion whatsoever, purely logic or reason. And of course, now this makes Mr. Spock the person who receives a lot of flack from the other Enterprise members for being completely logical, because there's an episode in the original series where a crew member actually dies under Spock's command when they're going down to another planet, and then Spock says that they don't have enough time to bury the body because it is logical that they repair their own ship so they can get the heck out of there. And of course, that kind of ticks off the other characters within the thing, but Spock is right. There's not enough time. Even though the human thing is to give the man a funeral service and to give him a burial, they're going to get killed by the aliens on that planet if they don't do that. So it's a very stoic idea and a very logical thing for them to move through that kind of organization, if you will, when it comes to being logical. So being very logical rather than emotional, those are the heights of Stoicism, and we see this idea played out throughout the entire play. And Shakespeare may even be critiquing Stoicism and critiquing the people who adhere to it throughout the play as well. But that's another conversation for another day that you guys are going to probably write an essay on. So moving forward, Act 1, Scene 1 through Act 3, Scene 2, a little plot review. So before the play begins, Caesar has defeated Pompey, his son-in-law, in the most recent civil war. The recent triumvirate, the first triumvirate, as you guys read about yesterday, was made up of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. And the three of them got into a really big fight and brought all of Rome into a civil war. Political issues aside, as I always said, you don't have to understand the politics to know what's going on here. Just like how you don't have to understand the politics of the Star Wars prequels trilogy to understand that Anakin's fallen to the dark side. Oops, spoiler alert. Well, it's been out for 20 years, not my fault. So, moving forward, now Pompey has been defeated. Caesar comes back, and as the last member of the triumvirate, he is named Dictator Perpetua, or Perpetual Dictator, by the people. And there's some senators that have some problems with this because, Caesar comes back. There's this big party. People are putting all kinds of stuff on his images throughout the Capitol. They're putting these laurel wreaths around him, and they're decorating his face wherever they see it, and that kind of thing. And this is a big problem because the people could, suggest and move to try to force the Senate to name him emperor or king. But Rome hasn't had one of those in over 400 years, so this is a really big issue for some of the senators. Some of the senators, especially Brutus, whose great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather actually was one of the people who got rid of the monarchy, and so Brutus is really tied to that idea. Now, Shakespeare doesn't really mention that, but it kind of plays into how he characterized him. So, of course, Caesar comes home with this big celebration, big parade, big party. And it just happens to coincide with the Lupercalia holiday. I'm not reminding you what the Lupercalia holiday was because you should be able to remember that from class. And then in all of this, a soothsayer screams to Caesar, "Beware the Ides of March." Ooh. Well, he doesn't sound like a ghost, but it's kind of spooky and creepy, so that's why I put it in there like that. But anyway, the Ides of March, of course, being the middle of the month, being the 15th of March. Watch out, Caesar. I can see the future. Something bad gonna happen to you, bro. And then we move on from there. A little bit of foreshadowing there. All right, and then suddenly we get into a little bit more information about Brutus and Cassius. Now, Cassius and Brutus are both senators and are both very powerful senators within the Roman Senate. But they have a conversation in which Cassius is explaining how frustrated he is with the fact that Caesar is going to become king, and they can sense this. And so maybe they need to do something about that. And so he lists off a lot of reasons for that, which I'll go into in just a brief second. But the biggest thing that he says to Brutus is right here when he says, "Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." So basically what Cassius is saying here is that we no longer rely on the stars as Romeo did, the stars that Romeo defied. And you know how that ended up for him. We don't look at the zodiac. It's not up to us to, let the stars determine our fates and let the soothsayers and the fortune tellers and everyone else look to the stars for us. We create our own fate. We are the masters of our own destiny. It's our fault that we are small and Caesar is great. And Brutus, you could have all of Rome in the palm of your hand if you just took it. It's all you have to do, because Rome loves you. And much in the same way, Cassius uses the same kind of temptation style that Satan uses upon Jesus when Jesus is spending 40 days in the wilderness. You guys remember that whole discussion and comparison that we had between Cassius in his snake-like tendencies and also Satan within Scripture. But before he actually reaches this point, Cassius lists off a couple of flaws of Caesar, and three in particular. Number one, that when he was fighting with him, or when they were fighting together in the war, in a previous war, or they were off on some vacation trip or something. I don't exactly remember. It's not important. But anyway, Caesar almost drowns in the Tiber River, and Cassius has to swim in and get him and save his butt. Caesar is also known to be sick with fever quite often. And on top of that fever, he also shakes uncontrollably with possible epilepsy. And they didn't have the word epilepsy back then, but that's probably what was going on. And if most productions do it right and follow the script, Caesar will typically, during his first entrance, have some kind of shake to his hands or to his head or something. It's very minor and very subtle, but it's supposed to illustrate this idea that Caesar's not in the best of health anyway. But also Cassius does make a pretty good point that this guy shouldn't be the ruler of the entire known world. Probably not the best thing for him to do. And of course, we get all this from this quote right here, or at least the 2 and 3 from this. He mentions number 1 a few lines back, but he says, he had a fever when he was in Spain, and when the fit was on him, I did mark how he did shake. 'Tis true, this God did shake. Yee. So naturally, that's what we're going to do. That's the only solution. Kill Caesar. He's not fit to be king. This isn't right. We're meant to rule because we're the noble people. Caesar isn't fit to do all of this. And especially if the people want to name him king, well, killing him for the greater good of Rome is the only thing that we can do. So meanwhile, in that night or a few nights later, it's unclear, Brutus is stuck in his home thinking, what am I to do? What am I going to do here? I can't kill Caesar. Is this the right thing to do? Caesar's my best friend. Caesar saved me during the war, because Brutus was actually on the side of Pompey, and then Caesar spared him. There's some interesting things there, and there's also some evidence, some historical evidence, and it's scant, but some historical evidence to suggest that Brutus may or may not have been Caesar's illegitimate son. We don't know. But anyway, they were very close regardless, and Caesar did treat Brutus like a son, and Brutus viewed him as a father. So Brutus is in a really hard point here because he believes what Cassius has told him, not just from the sickness and the shakes and stuff, but also from the fact that this whole king thing, this whole emperor, this whole Julius Caesar thing, not good for Rome. So the poor boy can't sleep, and he keeps his little servant boy Lucius busy through all hours of the night, calling him for a candle, calling him to do other things for him. And Brutus is just pacing throughout his entire home, just back and forth and back and forth. But then eventually the other conspirators arrive, the other senators, and they're led by Cassius, and they begin to lay out the plan of what's going to happen. And like Cassius knows he's pretty much got Brutus on his side, but this is just the final push to finally get Brutus where he's supposed to go. So Cassius is like, after they discuss everything, well, shouldn't we kill Mark Antony too? Because, he's pretty close to Caesar, and he might be able to stir up the crowd, or he might be able to pull this in some other places. And even though he's not a senator, he is that great military leader. So maybe we should knock him off too if we really want to do this. And then Brutus is like, no. Let's be sacrificers, not butchers. And they're like, okay, you're right, that's fine. But then they all leave, and they go off, and they're like, all right, we're going to do this thing, it's fine. But then Portia, this is Brutus's wife, Portia shows up, and she's like, what you been talking about, honey? Who are all these people that were here? And Brutus is like, go back to sleep. It doesn't concern you. And she's like, boy, I am your wife. It does concern me. I am one of the noblest women in all of Rome because my daddy was this big, important general, and you better freaking tell me or I'm going to be upset. And so Brutus continues to not do that and doesn't tell her anything. And then Portia stabs herself in the leg to prove a point, because she goes like, bam, I'm not even flinching. You think I'm too emotional of a woman to understand what's actually going on here? You better think again, bro. What a woman. But Brutus doesn't tell her anything, and we continue on. This is another critique of Stoicism, if that's not obvious right there. All right, so moving on. Scene begins, and Well, first of all, Caesar is in his home and he is with his wife Calpurnia. Calpurnia is demanding that Caesar not go to the Senate today because there's been a bad dream, and that she sees the statue of Caesar spilling out blood or this red water. And then Decius Brutus, not the Brutus that's the main character of the play, but Decius Brutus, another senator, shows up to the house as was planned in the previous scene to bring Caesar to the Senate. And he interprets the dream for Caesar in a way that, like, no, this is all of your good things spilling forth to affect all of Rome. This is your own blood, sweat, and tears that you're putting into the Senate, and you're putting into policy and public policy to make Rome the best place forever. So when people are going to respect you, they're going to wash in all of this, and they're going to respect you because you gave it to them. This is you giving yourself to all of Rome. And he's like, oh, that makes sense. All right, let's go to work. And then Calpurnia's like, no. But women aren't really listened to in this play at all. So of course Caesar marches on towards the capital. And while he's marching, the soothsayer, as I said in the title of this slide, is there. And Caesar looks at him and very mockingly says, the Ides of March are come. Then the soothsayer says, very foreboding tone, aye, Caesar, but not gone. Ew. That doesn't sound promising. So we get in there and the senators begin to lay it on thick, talking about how great Caesar is and how noble he is and how pious and grand noble Caesar, this, that, and the other. And Metellus Cimber, who's another senator, begins to do this, and he gets down on his knees in front of Caesar, lays up his hands and says, and asks for his brother Publius Cimber to be freed from his exile. And of course, Caesar says, no, I can't do that. That's not going to happen. I am as constant as a northern star. He says that eventually, which is a little bit ironic considering what's about to happen. And eventually the other senators crowd around him, get on their knees and back him up into a corner or back him up into a certain spot on the stage, depending on how it's been staged and directed. And then Casca, one of the other senators, as was planned, takes his knife and stabs him in the neck as he says, speak hands for me. And all the other senators go stab, 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 and end up destroying Caesar. And depending on how it is staged, or at least this was the case as it was in the film, Brutus has not stabbed Caesar yet. He's still in that mindset of like, I don't really know if I should do this. I mean, it's already happening, so I might as well do it because I'm not really doing any worse. But according to history, Caesar fought against the other senators until he saw Brutus right there with the knife. And then Brutus, being the last one, takes his knife, stabs Caesar with the final blow. As Caesar saw this, he stops fighting and says, et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus. Then fall, Caesar. Then after that, there's a little bit of silence, a little bit of shock. And all the other Roman senators who were not part of the conspiracy flee out into the streets. And news travels fast, so now Rome is in utter chaos. Capital has people running around all over the place, not knowing what to do. Rome is in complete and utter chaos, and that's just where it is. And then a little bit later, as the senators are talking and they're washing their hands on Caesar's blood for some unknown reason that doesn't make any sense to me, nor a lot of people, but it's all this symbolic political gesture, and they're washing their hands in his blood. And they, some of the senators rush out into the streets holding up their knives, and they say, freedom, liberty, enfranchisement, tyranny is dead. Basically, like, we've restored democracy. You're not going to have an emperor. You can thank us because we just saved you from potential tyranny. He hadn't done anything yet. Like, you didn't have to kill him. He didn't even want to be king. Because as you might remember, something that I failed to mention, during the Lupercalia holiday, Mark Antony presents Caesar with a crown not once, not twice, but 3 times. And 3 times, Caesar cast down the crown, saying, no, I don't want that. I'm not going to be the tyrant that we had 400 years ago. That's not for me. I'm committed to democracy. In the words of Emperor Palpatine, I love democracy. This guy wasn't bad. Like, at least not in the play. He wasn't bad. So Antony sends his servant, and then Brutus promises that Antony is not to be harmed, and then the servant runs back to Mark Antony, and then Antony comes on into the scene. And there's a lot of emotion that flies out of Antony, and Brutus basically tells him to control himself, be the real stoic, and then says that I will offer you a chance to speak at the funeral, but you will speak second, because I will speak first to let the crowd know what has happened, explain everything, get them calmed down, and then you can say your piece once I have controlled them. Then you can say your piece, so my reason will overshadow your emotion. Big mistake there, Brutus. Might be logical, but you're neglecting what human emotion can actually do. You're neglecting the fact that not every human adheres to a logical outcome every time. Emotion is a necessary part of that equation. So we get to Act 3, Scene 2, which is the funeral. And first, Brutus speaks, and he convinces the crowd that the senator's actions were for the greater good of Rome. And he speaks in the common man's language, as noted in the way that the script is written, because he speaks in prose. And then suddenly, the entire crowd is like, oh yeah, noble Brutus. Like, yeah, sure, okay. Well, they killed Caesar. We love Caesar. But like, you know, if Brutus says that he was going to become a tyrant, he probably was going to become a tyrant. So well done, Brutus. Great man. Thank you. Thank you. Woohoo, we're free. Yeah. And then Antony shows up and begins to speak as Brutus leaves the scene. And Brutus is gone at this point. Like, the other senators, they've left. They're like, we're getting the heck out of Dodge, because we're not that we're scared, because I just convinced everybody that we're fine. But it's not exactly the case, because Antony convinces them otherwise. And immediately, by saying the same phrase over and over and over again, that Brutus is an honorable man. So are they all honorable men. But Antony believes in the will and the intelligence of the people quite more than Brutus does, because Antony speaks in poetry, not in the language of the people, making it seem that they're smarter than Brutus gave them credit for. And then all of Rome is thrown back into the chaos that it originally was right after the death of Caesar. And of course, this is effectively the turning point of the play. After Antony's speech and after this scene ends, the whole play takes on a new kind of feeling. And scholars have pointed for centuries at this idea that, like, it doesn't even feel like the same play from here on out. And this is precisely why we stopped reading and stopped studying it right here. Because, you know, one day, for example, my girlfriend hopes to direct Caesar, and she hopes to adapt it in a way that the play actually ends here. And then she does some creative stuff to show the rest of the story. But to a lot of people, you know, the story of the play still has some places to go, but like, it's just wrapping up everything from here. This is the climax of the play. It's not the resolution, but it is the climax, because the rest of the play, we're in Civil War mode. We're not in a Senate house. We're not in the houses of the people. We're not planning a conspiracy. We're not planning an assassination. We're in full-blown civil war, where it's the senators versus Antony and his people. So effectively, this is the turning point, and it takes on a completely different feeling. Now, to illustrate this through a modern example, those of you familiar with the Harry Potter saga know that, well, it depends on who you ask, but you know, you have your first two books. You have Philosopher's Stone and Chamber of Secrets. And those are great little fantasy romps into this magical world of Hogwarts. And yeah, Harry has some challenges with your main villain, because Voldemort's attached onto the back of Quirrell's head, and he has to defeat him there. And then, you know, in the second one, you know, Voldemort comes back in this other form as, through this diary, and he's like that part of his, spirit is somehow in it and whatever. And, of course that's explained later on, but really later on, but that's just really, it's a JK. But it's the same thing, because he has to fight Voldemort in one form, then fight him in another form, and then that's all fine and good. But then you get into Prisoner of Azkaban, and it's like, oh, this is getting pretty dark. There's more going on here. You mean the guy that betrayed the Potters has been here the whole time? What? There's more going on here? There's a darker conspiracy going on here? And then you get to book 4 and Goblet of Fire, and then Voldemort actually comes back, and you're like, this just got real. This don't even feel like the same world anymore. This ain't just a children's story. This is like growing up with me. At least it grew up with me, because I grew up as the books came out. It's crazy. Good time too. But it reaches a certain point of maturity to where we're just now in full-blown war against Voldemort. And in that same way, this is a turning point where it doesn't feel like the same story, because now we're in a full-blown civil war, one civil war that we just ended, that is now there's new political issues, and now there's a whole new war going on. And so this is a big turning point of the play, in which we will soon be introduced to the second triumvirate, which you guys read about on Monday. I almost said yesterday, because this is Tuesday for me. But what you guys read about on Monday, with Antony, Lepidus, and Octavius Caesar, who is Julius Caesar's nephew, I believe. And so they're going to form a new kind of branch of government, like kind of a coup kind of thing, in which they just kind of overtake Rome, as Antony feels that is the thing to do. And then Antony has all the people on his side, so it's really just the senators and their forces against Antony and Lepidus and Octavian and their forces. And so that's where I'm going to leave you. So Act 3, Scene 3, where you're going to begin reading today, is going to show you a little bit of the people and what their reactions are to stuff. And then you're going to see the second triumvirate and their plans, their war plans, and then we will move to the third scene that you're going to read, which shows you a little bit more of Brutus and Cassius's plans to continue their fight against Antony and restore the Republic to what they wanted it to be in the first place. So that's where I'm going to leave you. It's 3 very short scenes. I know it seems like a lot to assign 3 scenes, but they're very short. But the thing about these short scenes is Shakespeare is always showing something quite important, something quite interesting, and he's trying to prove a point in some way with all 3 of those scenes. And they're small scenes, and it's like this small little trio of scenes, even though we're moving in from Act 3 to Act 4. But they're very short, but they all have a very significant purpose. And the questions that you're going to see on Actively Learn will illustrate those purposes, and hopefully you guys will be able to identify those on your own. So happy reading. Welcome to the Roman Civil War between the second triumvirate and the previous senators. So have fun. If you guys have questions, let me know. I know that was a rather long lecture, but I think it's all important for you guys to have that material. And so if you got any questions, just let me know, and I will see you guys on Friday.